How's it going, chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. I just got done watching a video by the Whisky Tribe guys talking about smoothness in whiskey. And it reminded me that I've been wanting to talk about this on the channel for a long time. So, this is what we're talking about today, team. Is smoothness a good thing in whiskey? Is it something you want? And then, how do you affect it? How do you change it? What levers do you pull to make a whiskey smoother or less smooth when you're producing a whiskey yourself? Welcome Distiller, everyone. I'm Jesse, and this is the channel all about chasing the craft of home distillation and making it a legitimate hobby. So if you like making your own spirits, guys, if you like tasting spirits, if you're into craft beverages, or you just want to know how they're made, this is the right channel for you. Make sure you subscribe down below. Alright team, smoothness in a whiskey. I've got two whiskeys here. One, which I would say is relatively smooth. It's not crazy smooth. It's 40% ABV, it's nice and sweet, pretty approachable. And a whiskey that is not so smooth. It is still 40% ABV. That's just the first thing I grabbed off the shelf that reminded me of something that's not so smooth. So it's a bit jaggier, obviously big smoke characters and all of that sort of stuff. But let's talk a little more specifically about what smoothness is before we get into this, and then we can talk about how we make a whiskey smooth if we're producing it ourselves. Smoothness is a hard word. When I hear someone say this whiskey is so smooth, or describes a whiskey as being smooth, or says they like smooth whiskey, I think one of two things. One is that they just generally like a very approachable, easy drinking whiskey that has nothing really standing out about it, unless that thing that's standing out is kind of on the sweet, pretty desserty side of things. That's one thing that I think, and I try to think that more often than not. The second thing I think is this person knows nothing about whiskey whatsoever, and that's just what they've heard other people say. It just so happens that if people don't really like whiskey, and if they're not really into whiskey, and they are just sort of copying what they've heard from someone else, chances are that person is probably going to like, you know, a much smoother, more approachable whiskey. I think the other thing that's very real too is that before you get into whiskey and before you start buying whiskies that are worth a little bit more money, or they're, you know, a better whiskey, some of the bottom shelf stuff is not that good, and it is super rough with no benefit to it. So as an overall definition, I think that's kind of what people are talking about when they refer to smoothness. But let's dive in a little bit deeper and have a look at some specific attributes that can go one way or the other that really contribute to this friendly, approachable nature of a whiskey. And as we're going through each of these points, let's have a talk about some of the levers you can pull as a distiller, as a blender, to help push a whiskey one way or the other, towards or away from smoothness. The first one, and the one I think that pops out most of all for most people, is the alcohol burn. That I think is number one thing that people talk about when they talk about smoothness. If you don't get a big alcohol burn when you're drinking the whiskey, it's smooth. I get this, I understand this, but in my mind, quite often, I would rather take the alcohol burn to get more flavour and more intense flavour than to have less alcohol flavour and less intense flavours in the whiskey as well. That being said, if that higher alcohol feeling and sensation doesn't bring with it a whole lot more flavour, yeah, I get it. I don't like it. And I think that's where some of the lower shelf, cheaper whiskies come in, that people get this perception from. So what can we do to change this, to affect how much alcohol burn you get? Number one is, I think you just get used to drinking whiskey. Like, that's not really something you do as a distiller, but for you at a personal level, I'm not going to go into it now, but I do have a video, I'll put a card up top, on getting past that burn to be able to taste other things in a whiskey and appreciate what's going on, or assess a whiskey, or whatever you want to do. The first thing as a distiller, as a blender, as a consumer yourself, that I think you can do is to proof it down. So if you're drinking a spirit that's 55%, it's just more likely to have a big alcohol burn than something that's 40%. Both of these are 40%. It's just the way it is, guys. There's more alcohol burn. Just be aware that if you proof it down and drink it straight away, it may actually be more fiery, and that's because it's kicking a whole lot of stuff out of solution and making a lot of things come up and be more aggressive in the flavour that give the impression that it's alcohol burn. So just be aware of that. If you're proofing it down yourself to bottle, proof it down, leave it for a week or something, and then you'll get that effect of the proofed down spirit. The next thing that can really affect this is our cuts. More heads equals more burn, more often than not. Now, if you're aging a whiskey for a long ass time, you know, like if you're going for a Lafroig 10 or an Ardbeg 10 sort of profile, you're going to have to age that whiskey for a long time, and you can get away with more heads. And a lot of people would argue that that's going to give you more flavour in the end result as well. But if you're doing something that's a lot younger, keep the heads down, be less greedy with your cuts, be tighter with your cuts, and you'll reduce the alcohol burn. The other thing that can affect this is a lot of the rest of the things we're going to talk about further down the track. And we'll talk about sweetness, especially right at the end. But adding sweetness to a whiskey can really dial back that alcohol burn. We'll get to that at the end. Alright guys, before we get on to the next point, I need to say right now that I am whipping through this pretty quick because it's going to be a fairly long video anyway, I think. If there's a point that you think I miss, you know, like a specific flavour or aspect of a whiskey that you think that makes a whiskey smooth or not smooth, sing out in the comments down below. If I talk about a specific aspect and I don't talk about something that we can adjust as distillers to change that, once again, leave your comments down in the comment section below. The next one that I think comes up a lot, actually, why am I not drinking while I'm doing this? So the next thing that comes up a whole lot is astringency. So astringency is the flavour of a over-steeped tea bag. It's that puckering, weird sensation in your mouth. A lot of people do not like this flavour in their whiskey. Some people do, and that's totally cool. That's totally cool. And I can understand why. Like I said, it's not a friendly, approachable, open flavour. If you get too much in a whiskey for your personal preference, it can really overtake everything else and you don't get much past it. So let's have a talk about a couple of things that you could do to change that. The first one is the wood that you're using to age with, and that is either the type of wood or the way you treat the wood, or what you do with the wood actually as well. So first of all, the type of wood. So something like American oak would probably, I think a lot of people would agree that it's more likely to have more astringency than something like a French oak, for example. Also, the way you treat the wood can have a big effect on this as well. So if you do a lighter, so if you just do a toast and not a whole lot of charring, a lighter toast with American oak, you're probably more likely to get a lot more astringency. If you do a nice heavy, you know, number 4 char, that's going to cut the astringency way down with everything else being the same. The other thing that's going to affect this is the amount of oak and the time of oak on the spirit, if that makes sense. So you'll hear a lot of people talking, especially if they're in charge of a barrel program or something like that for a commercial place, about getting the spirit out of the barrel before it goes astringent. And that sort of, it reaches its peak, and then after there it's going to keep getting more astringent. The next thing in my mind is actually really close to that, and that's the spiciness that comes out in some whiskies. And I say that because it's a very different sensation, but you almost react to it the same way. It's a sensation as much as it is a flavour, in fact more often than it is a flavour, although flavours can come along with it. And it's something that can attack you if you're not ready for it. It can come up and grab you. And once again, if it goes past that point of pleasure for you, it starts heading into, I wouldn't say pain, but discomfort. I know that maybe if you guys haven't had a whiskey that has spice in it, that can sound kind of weird. I know from personal experience, my Bastard whiskey, for example, went through a phase, which is starting to come out of now actually, but that was just straight up pepper for a long time. Mostly black pepper, a little bit of white pepper, a little bit of the fruity berryish sort of flavours and the like black peppercorn flavour with it as well, but mostly just the spiciness that came along with that. And if you're not into that, guys, that's a pretty big thing. The main points that I would say here, the main thing that you can change to alter whether or not you're getting spiciness, is something that I learned relatively recently when I was with Harry at Still Austin in Austin, Texas, and he talked to me about and taught me about the different barrel entry points, the different ABVs that you can put it into a barrel, or you know, put wood into a glass jar for us if you're doing it that way. And once you're sort of over the 55% or 110 proof range, you're starting to really head towards more the spicy astringency and hardcore aspects of the barrel. If you're below 55%, you're heading towards sweet, sugary, vanilla type flavors. And of course, this is a continuum, so you don't have to be one or the other. You can kind of take a little less of this, but a little of this too, you know, or mostly that, you get the idea, right? A light whiskey can also be considered a smooth whiskey as well. And this is taking us back to the distilling process part of it mostly. A light whiskey, how do you describe a light whiskey? A light whiskey is literally thinner, it is more delicate, it is lighter on your tongue, it doesn't feel thick and heavy. It's the absence of the oily, buttery congeners that come through in, you know, a pot-stilled whiskey, especially something, you know, that's got lots of peat or something like that in it. So it's heading more towards the vodka side of things. It's more delicate. That doesn't mean that it's bad, it doesn't mean that it's good, it just means that it's different. How do we make a lighter whiskey? Multiple distillations, running through plates and distilling to a higher ABV, or these are all the sort of things that are going to help nudge that whiskey towards lightness. Now this next point I thought about for a long time, trying to decide what to call it, and the closest thing that I could get to the description of what it is softness. I got to softness because it's almost the sensation of putting a really soft, light, fluffy marshmallow in your mouth. Not the sweetness, not the flavour, the sensation. And it's more of a mouthfeel thing, and it's got this creamy feeling to it, but it's light. It's not heavy and oily soft. It's more like, oh god, like velvet. It's more like a velvety sort of feeling. And there is a certain taste that comes along with it, but I'm struggling to describe that. So if you can describe that, help me out. Let me know what you think maybe I'm trying to get at and say it in your own words. But when you get this in a whiskey, it just brings everything up a little bit. It takes everything and makes it more approachable. It's kind of like sweetness in a whiskey in some ways. Yeah, I'm really struggling to describe it. Help me out, guys. But the way that we get there, the way that you can add this in my experience, is mostly through ingredients. Things like wheat and oat. And you know what, guys? If you're a beer drinker, if you're a craft beer drinker, go and have a Hefeweizen. Yeah, something with a whole lot of wheat in it, or an oatmeal stout. Yeah, so it's, once again, wheat and oats, right? Have something like that and think about the mouthfeel. It's this velvety, soft feeling in your mouth that just pushes it towards a warm hug. I know, that's horrible. That's horrible, but I think you get what you mean, right, guys? And once again, the only way that I've really sort of seen that happen more so is with ingredients. So oats and wheat are the two things that really come to mind. I think corn does it as well, but in a much lesser degree. But if you compare a mash with a whole lot of corn in it compared to a mash with 100% malted barley or sugar even, for example, the corn's more in that direction. And then I would say wheat and then oats in my limited experience with these ingredients. If you've got more experience, once again, let us know. The next thing I want to talk about is flavors, really strong flavors. Some people just like strong flavors, right? Like, I love a short black. I love it. I'll drink other coffees as well, but straight up, short black is dope. I love it. Whereas my wife would much rather have her coffee with cream and sugar. There are a whole lot of flavors that can come through in whiskey that are very similar. And the first one that springs to mind is peat. Love it or hate it. There's not often something in between, and you can't deny that it's a really strong flavor. Now, a lot of people will describe that as smoothness. If peat is something that is not an approachable flavor for them, that whiskey is not smooth. The same with a lot of the other flavors that come along with peat, so the saltiness or the brininess or the iodininess. Once again, if you have that flavor in your whiskey and it's something that's foreign or challenging to you, you can describe it as not smooth. I mean, obviously, the obvious thing is if you want peat, you put peated malt in there, right? Personally, I think that a lot of the briny and salty flavors that come in Islay Scotches come from the peat as well. I know a lot of them say that it's because of the the ocean air and stuff where they age it. That could be true. I haven't had experience with that, but I get peaty, briny flavors in anything that I've put peat in. And obviously, the more peat or smoked malt or whatever it is, the flavor that you're putting in there that's not an approachable flavor, the further you push that, the more you put in there, the bigger that flavor is going to be. So that's how you pull on that lever, guys. The other thing you can do to accentuate that once you've got those flavors in your mash and coming through your still is to mess with your cuts once again. So the further you go down into the tails, the more you're going to find these grungy, challenging flavors. Let's call them challenging. So all of these things, the smoke, the brine, the salt, the iodine, in my experience, once again, guys, that's all I can talk to really, is the further you go down into the tails, to a point, of course, that's where you're going to find these flavors. So you can fine tune what you've done with your recipe based on your cuts. From flavor to funk, and I am separating these two things out because in my mind they're kind of different. One's coming mostly from the ingredient, and the other is an intangible thing that mostly comes from... Don't get me wrong, you can get funk from peat for sure. A lot of peat flavored whiskies have old gym socks. I mean, isn't it Lefroy describes their stuff as a walrus smoking a cigar, and that's pretty freaking spot on. But what I'm talking about more comes from wild ferments from, you know, in rum, dunder pits, those sort of things. And it is this crazy, funky, weird flavor that is heading towards straight up rotten and horrible. But it's 3/4 the way there, and that is either disgusting to people and not smooth, or it's intriguing to people, like blue cheese, yeah? Like sour beer, like farmhouse ales, sauerkraut, kimchi, all of these things that are the fermented foods, right? Obviously wild fermenting with wild yeast, or introducing lacto, Brett, one of these sort of wild cultures can push it in that direction. Using dunder or muck, backset, all of these sort of things can help push it up as well. And once again, going deeper into your tails when you're doing your cuts. So everything I've talked about so far, if you add more of it, it makes the whiskey less smooth. If you take it away, it makes the whiskey smoother. So let's talk about something that when you dial it up in a whiskey, it makes the whiskey more smooth, and that's sweetness. I'm going to break this into two parts. Number one is actual sweetness, as in more sugar in the whiskey, and the second one is the perception of sweetness, and we'll get to that in a minute. Wood sugars, sugar from fruit, pretty much any sugar that you add to a whiskey is going to make it's going to dial a lot of those jaggy, harsh flavors that make it not smooth. It's going to drag those down. And the first part with actual sweetness here, I'm talking about the fact that it makes it more viscous, the fact that it changes the mouthfeel, and the actual sweetness a little bit as well. But you can actually add something to a whiskey like glycerin and make it a whole lot smoother without making it really taste that much difference. I don't know, I feel like I can taste this stuff, and because of that reason I don't really like using it. It doesn't taste bad, it just feels like cheating, and that's stupid. I know I need to get over that. I really need to get over that. I need to blind test myself is what I need to do. Anyway, this is not the point of not the point of the story, but this is one of the things that you can do to make the whiskey smoother, is add a little glycerin. So if you're making spirits for your own personal use, you can do whatever you want, guys. Like, no one's telling you that you can't just put maple syrup in there, or honey, or whatever it is that you want to do. Glycerin, there's no problem, add what you want. But for the guys that want to do it all natural, or that are in commercial production and limited on these things, there's two main things. One is the sugars coming from the wood. So once again, a higher char, a deeper char into the wood that's going to caramelize more of these sugars, make them more readily available to get into the spirits, and really get in there and do their job. That's going to help. And also finishing. So if you've got a barrel that had wine in it, or cognac in it, or something that was sweet beforehand, that's going to carry over into the finished product as well. So that's actual sweetness that I'm talking about. The next thing I want to talk about is perceived sweetness. Flavors that make your brain think sweet. You can have vanilla flavor that isn't sweet. You can have vanilla flavor that isn't sweet. You can have fruit flavors that aren't sweet. You can have all sorts of flavors in the whiskey that give the impression of sweetness without actually adding sugar to the spirit. And these things trick your brain into thinking it's sweet, and in my experience, the presence of the flavor makes it feel smoother, if that makes sense. Now this is a tricky thing, because these flavors can come from damn near anywhere. These flavors can come from all sorts of different places. The one that I want to experiment with in the near future is I heard the guys at can't remember the name of the distillery, but the place that makes Teeling and Redbreast and all that, saying that lacto and Brett in the ferment add to a fruity sweetness at the end. And that would make sense to me. That kind of aligns with my experience with rum, having all sorts of funky stuff in there that turns into sort of tropical fruit flavors later on after distillation. Obviously these flavors can come from the wood, they can come from the ingredients, they can come from age and chilling, they can come from the finish as well, you know, something like port or sherry. Anything like that is going to impart these sort of flavors that give the impression of sweetness without the actual sweetness. Alright guys, so we've talked about a whole lot of things that can make a whiskey smoother, but I haven't talked about whether or not smoothness is good. And I think I've given enough hints to tell you what I think without having to tell you, right? It's just another thing in the whiskey. It's not good, it's not bad, it's what do you like? Do you like a little bit of astringency in your whiskey? No, that's cool, but I do. I love it. I think it's great. I am not big on pancakes and syrup for breakfast. I think it is empty carbs and empty sugar that just taste sweet. Boring. Throw some salty, funky ass bacon on top of it, and now we're talking. And that's kind of how I feel about whiskey too. So the best whiskey is the whiskey that you like. The best type of whiskey is the type of whiskey you like. If you like it smooth, that's cool. If you don't like it smooth, that's cool. And it pains me to see it, but sometimes I see people giving advice based on what they like, not what the other person likes. I'm not saying I'm not pointing at any of you guys, I'm talking about other forums that I've seen it on. So just a warning on that one, guys. Smooth is not necessarily good. A lack of astringency is not necessarily good. Having the very least amount of burn in a spirit is not necessarily the best spirit. What do you like? How do you like it? That's what's cool. Oh, we're back to silence again. Anyway, before we go, team, I have to say a huge thank you to the Patreons. I cannot do this stuff without you guys. You literally keep the lights on here, team, so thank you so much for that. Oh, and by the way, I will be announcing the winner for the competition for the 3 kilos of peated malt. That will be Friday afternoon my time when I announce that. Alright team, that's it for me. I hope you had fun with this one, guys. I hope maybe I gave people a little more license to do what they want to do and head down the flavor profiles that they like. And I hope that maybe this gave people a little bit of more information or a few leads to start being able to figure out how to do that for themselves. Once again, team, if you're looking for more information, check the comments out below because people will be dropping knowledge down there. It's awesome. I love to see it. But I'm out of here. I've been talking for far too long. I'll catch you next time, guys. See ya.